in 1987, a second level of play was introduced. In Alberta, they called it Tier 2. In later years, the categories were defined as men's A, men's B, women's A, women's B, etc. In 1987, in your opinion, even if you weren't that involved at the time, did you see a change in the sport, in the division between Tier 1 and Tier 2?
My opinion, and I remember doing some broadcasting at the time, the second Tier 2 was a very exciting division to watch. Like, at that time, they were playing very fast pace. They were explosive. There was a lot of enthusiasm. The first division are a lot of people that you're used to seeing. And I think that their style of play was a lot different, maybe more technical or strategical. Whereas the second division was all guns blazing. They just went out there, boom, and see what we can get. So if you took the best team from the second division against the best team in the first division, probably the first team would have a better chance of winning because of experience, style, and strategy, but maybe not by much. You would say that you would tend to say that the players in the second division, the observation from afar was, well, the first division's got all the better players. No, I saw some players in the second division, and maybe that they were very comfortable staying there for different reasons, like the camaraderie of the team that they have, their people they're familiar with, rather than playing for another team in the first division. They were very explosive, but the one key ingredient I saw with them, they were extremely enthusiastic. And I remember watching or broadcasting their games, and it was a thrill because they didn't disappoint. I would also say is that their expectations maybe were different. We're here to win, we'll do whatever. Whereas in the first division, there were a lot of teams that had a lot of pressure on themselves because they felt, oh, well, we should win, but they forgot certain ethics like hard work and forechecking. Some of them were too much into scoring and not back checking. Whereas the second division, one thing I remember was the camaraderie was amongst them. You could see them from up there when you're broadcasting or observing them, watching them on the bench. Like it was a real breath of fresh air. And I think that was a good move by the league to finally do that for various reasons, numerous ones. But one could be level, one could be because you have so many teams in the first division, you got to move other teams into another division. But it was thrilling to watch.
Okay, so you mentioned the broadcasting. So let's fill in the viewers on the broadcasting that was done in the city of Edmonton for ball hockey, and tell me what you thought of the influence that the broadcasting of games on local TV did for the sport.
No question about it. It was awareness. Although our broadcasting may not have been professional like you see on television, because we're novices, but we tried to bring a lot of enthusiasm to the game. And as you had mentioned earlier, and I would point out that it brought a lot of awareness. Years later, people say, I'll remember you doing games, but a lot of them were Capital City Ball Hockey Association games, but it created an awareness. And I think that the seeds of growth were years later when maybe kids or teenagers flicking channels saw it on TV, say, hey, I want to play in that league. I want to do that. Or else, I think the biggest one was there were a lot of people in elementary or junior high school, or even after that did not know that a ball hockey league existed and would say, how do I become part of that? How do we or my friends or whatever become part of that? It's something like Steve Posnick could really answer better, or someone at that time, but no question, it was awareness. Like maybe the broadcasting quality was not like you're used to or as fast paced as like a hockey game or lacrosse, but because you have to run instead of skate, but it brought a lot of awareness. And I remember one of Kenny Remchuk played with the Blitz. You know, you got Perry Berzan with the Emperors. Hey, these guys are playing. And then we told the story that when the Nationals were in Edmonton, I think it was in 1980, correct me, it might be 1981, Mike Palmatier and Dino Cicerelli were part of the Ontario team. That brought a lot of awareness. And the ironic thing is that some of the best players in the Capital City Ball Hockey Association were not skaters. They were more like track athletes and just in good shape people. And they were very good at hockey. Andre Gagnon, Billy Perdue, they're the ones that really stick out in my mind. Do you know who, like, at the time, I don't know if you're aware of this, the youngest player at that time that ever played in our league was Gino Gennaro. And he was with the Crazy Canucks. And he was 15 when he started, but he was allowed to because you had to be 16 by a certain date, and he got in. But even at 15, he was very good. He was really good. But the ball hockey was really the primary reason was to broadcast ball hockey. We also had people who were on a student program through a Government of Canada subsidy who got work experience. But it was to broadcast ball hockey, to create awareness, get the message out. And people were seeing new things. They saw standings, they saw player stats. And years later, we were planting the seeds for expansion. You wanted more expansion, more teams, more levels. And years later, we got women, teenagers, and eventually kids. Now, what a thrill for a kid who's in elementary school to play competitive ball hockey. And then they bring in friends, and then it grows. And that is one of the things I am most proud of, is the fact that Lewisham Media is organized through the Government of Canada subsidy program to get people in broadcasting working, that we got to TV. The Edmonton Ball Hockey Association, they had the only thing they had up until that day was a videotape of them in the Nationals, which may have been on Capital Television, Videotron, at the conclusion sometime later. But it was, we to this day, until people tell us, do not know what the rewards of or what it meant to other people, beyond the fact of, oh, well, there's nothing to do on a summer day. It's lousy weather outside, turning on the ball hockey, and, you know, we see some players that we know, whatever teams play, it was a great game, and that's it. It goes well beyond that. And we didn't know that until the feedback we got years later. And you end up saying, I never thought of that.
Do you have a favorite personal memory? And do you have anything that's a favorite team or organization memory?
Best team that I ever saw organized were the Emperors. Well, actually, it would be the Ballers, because Rick Aslan had these Shakers Acres promotions, and he put a lot of money in the bank. They all had the same uniform. They all had these special sweatpants. They were first class, without a doubt. They never won the championship, but they got close. But the Emperors, every year they had a handful of players, but they had some really good people, like really good players. And you look at them and you say, well, I've never heard of you in the hockey, junior hockey or anything like this, except for Perry Berzan and Roy Pulaski. You look at them, but they had years and years of experience in the large gymnasiums in northern Edmonton, but they were very good. That would be, I can't say for myself because that would be for someone else to comment on about how well organized we were. But I'll tell you this, the West Stars, we had our own farm system. 2 players made it. We had our own farm system because in the school that we played in the West End, we had a main gymnasium and a small gymnasium. So I knew some people who wanted to play, but they couldn't play with us. They brought some people that were good enough and eventually play for us. We had a farm system. That was maybe one of my fondest memories, that we had people we could draw from that we didn't even know at a certain point. My personal favorite memory would have to be in the playoffs in year 1 and year 2. We fell behind 2-0 in the series, best of 5. We came back and won 3 in a row. We did it against the Blitz. And then the following year, we did it against the Mongoose. And the series before, the underdog Ballers led us 2-1. If we would have lost, it would have been very humiliating. We were down 2-1 in the series. We won the next 2 games and won the series. And then we played the Mongoose, and we fell behind 2-0. We came back and won that. That was, I think that the first year against the Blitz was very, very special for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Blitz were called the Southside Raiders at the time. We had never beaten them in any game, exhibition, regular season. We fell behind 2-0, and they were very, very strong. As a result of the lifeguard incident, 3 players were suspended for the year. They couldn't play with us. We had a smaller team, and we performed better. So we had 2 lines plus an extra. Somebody had to play defense and forward at the same time. And in a miracle, we won that series against Ian Ferguson, the best goalie in the Ball Hockey Association at the time. But after we won the first game, we had a lot of confidence and we just gelled completely. I should also point out another memory. In the first year, you had the Edmonton Sun, who were from another division. They stacked their team at the end, and they didn't provide identification. We didn't have identification that first year. So if a guy's name was Joe Smith, all of a sudden it's somebody else, but he says, "Oh, I'm Joe Smith." You know, there was no idea, and we knew otherwise. But the performance that took place by then West End Rangers, they had a line of Greg Blay, Wayne Awashik, Mark Dufresne. They had another player who was a soccer player by the name of Andre Gagnon. Like, we're watching them play against a stacked team from the Edmonton Sun, and they lost, but they lost barely. And I remember there were some players who played that year. Mike Bueller was another one. But the 3 forwards, Awashik, Blay, and Dufresne, I knew those guys from before that. That was some of the best performances up until that time that we had ever seen. Like, they were incredible. And yet the hot goaltending from the Edmonton Sun, who was one of the illegal players, which helped them. But it was like, you watch that performance of play and you say, okay, now I got to do better than that next year. That was a fond memory. The first year is probably the fondest memory because it was up and down, up and down, up and down. You never knew about things. You didn't know your schedule 3 weeks, except for 3 weeks. And then when you get to the end of the 3 weeks, you didn't know what you're going to have ahead of that. Sometimes you would have breathed a sigh of relief that you didn't have to play the top team right away. You could wait a little bit. But in July, at that time, we knew who we were playing. We played against the top teams. But it was ultimately, the fondest memory I had of playing in the Ball Hockey Association was the people I met, the things that I learned about dealing with people and dealing with the city and dealing with other institutions, arenas and whatnot. And also because some of the people that I met in ball hockey became lifelong friends, and I'm still in touch with them to this day. And when I visit Edmonton, I see them. Was the camaraderie. And remember, this was during the depths of a recession, a lot of time on your hands. And so when you had a practice to look forward to or a game to look forward to, or it was the winter and you were playing in a small gymnasium, you're getting ready for the season. You're getting ready for the season. And then afterwards, you'd talk about football, NFL, or you would go, have a drink, go for drinks or whatever. That had to be the highlight of that, was the camaraderie and the people that you meet. Here's a little hidden gem. I said to you this before. There are friends or relatives that hadn't seen each other for years. We didn't have internet back then. And all of a sudden they meet, mostly friends. The odd time cousins know where they are, but friends who hadn't seen each other for years suddenly meet up on different teams at the ball hockey. Or else, some cases it was like you had girlfriends of one guy and a girlfriend of another guy on different teams, and they meet for the first time in many years. Another thing was, and this is really stretching it, there were some, because of the fans, not necessarily your fans, because like you may have a teammate who has a girlfriend who brings her friends over, and then guys start dating. But there are occasions where 2 girls from different teams, because they're dating somebody or else they're just there, they meet a guy from another team or in the stands, and they have a long-term relationship. That happened. I know of a few cases where, and eventually they got married. After that, I don't know, but people who met each other, and then, that adds another chapter. So it was quite an experience. And then I look back at the second year, biggest thrill was finally pulling everything together with Rick Aslan and Steve Plozovic, becoming very, very highly organized, so that it's not like you're riding a bicycle, you're actually driving in a car. Because when Rick Aslan came, he had that impact. You're not driving a bicycle anymore. You're in a car. You can do things better and faster, and you really started to move forward. And The highway was in front of us. We just had to make all the room on the road to get there, the destination to get there, which was to be thoroughly organized, to have a lot of teams, to have trophies, rings, etc., and exposure.
Are you still involved in ball hockey? And if you aren't, would you ever want to get back involved with the sport?
No, I'm not involved in ball hockey or in broadcasting for that matter. I've moved on. I'm doing other things. I should point out that regarding getting back, I'm not sure. Here in Vancouver, it's like I don't hear very much about it. I don't ask or whatever. I've heard a few things, but it's not on people's minds here, like in conversation or whatever. To answer your question, I don't know. I don't know.
Did you have any family that were involved in the sport at all?
No.
And let me ask you this this you've already probably answered, but what do you feel has made the greatest impact on the growth of the sport?
That's a difficult question to answer, but ultimately it would have to been the marketing and the exposure of ball hockey. And secondly, I think it was enabling teenagers and even smaller kids to play in this game, because I can't say that a guy who's in elementary school, he can put together, he or a couple of friends could put together an entire team. But I saw for myself where a parent brings a young kid into the office to Steve Pozovic wanting to join a team. And it must be an incredible thrill for a young kid to play ball hockey for a purpose and meaningful, that being a championship or something of the sort. And the side effect being able to meet new friends, which who knows what it could lead to. But I think it was to seeing teenagers, young kids, they're there to be happy and play. But teenagers already, they have a sense of meaning and purpose and victory. Like whoever they're with, you know, if they gain players from year to year. But for teenagers, which I never got, the closest you could get is playing ball hockey in a gymnasium. And I'm talking about people, let's say, between the ages of 10 to 13 or 14, for them to have that opportunity to play for a championship and a meaningful thing. And who knows what other skills they pick up along the way, be it leadership, be it coaching, be it, you know, bringing cohesiveness amongst a group, or even finding a way to get to a tarmac or a school parking lot, or a parking lot for that matter, just to practice, you know, just to be together. And ultimately, I think that was the biggest one. Young kids and teenagers having meaningful purpose to challenge for and to be rewarded in the end. Of course, there's a downside of defeat, but hey, look where you were a couple of years ago. You didn't have this opportunity. And plus then they tell other people, and as you get older, you play more ball hockey, and then you play when you're already in your 20s and 30s and 40s, like Malcolm Stinson. And I think that also one thing that was overlooked, we spoke earlier about Malcolm Stinson and the Playboys. You didn't say the Playboys, you said Malcolm Stinson and the Playboys. Although they did win the championship one year, I believe, maybe long ago in the very beginning, but they were always challenging. But they had two players. One of them was Doug McCarthy, and another one was Danny Slupek. I have heard stories about how dominating of a line that they were, and yet I never saw them. But I heard stories about the goals and the stats and whatnot. Now, in a serious game, the other team could come up with a defensive unit to prevent them from scoring. But I've heard stories about how explosive they were, and it's a shame I never got to see them. You get a guy like Stinson who is so dedicated that he would play for so many years. And I understand, I was told that, and I don't know to what degree, that his organizational input. But I think that is somebody who you look to say, well, I don't just have to think about playing ball hockey for a few years and then that's it. You know, there is the possibility somewhere to find a place even if it's in a seniors league, to play ball hockey for a very, very long time, get a lot of exercise, have something to do, organize your time, and whatever else rewards that it brings you. Self-fulfillment, self-satisfaction. You can't say that guys who became coaches didn't have some fulfillment, that this is something they always wanted to do, and they got an opportunity to do it for a brief period of time that meant a lot. Or else a guy who organizes a team, who's always wanted to be the general manager, organize a team and win a championship. You look at Gerald Delassalle. He did it for several years in a row, and he was very smart in the people that he and his brother. I want to say something else. Mitch Delassalle, in my opinion, was one of the best up until at least the early years, was the best defenseman I ever saw for one apparent reason. He was the most technical defenseman I have ever seen. You see, he didn't have an overwhelming slap shot. He had a wrist shot, which worked, for deflection and other things. But technically speaking, he was one of the best defensemen, maybe the best defenseman I've ever seen play ball hockey. Positional wise, incredibly well. There are others that were very good. And you could say that in certain categories, they were better. But that was just, you asked me before, what are some of the things that stick out? It was the fact of the way that you had a player who played very well, exceptionally well in his position, and yet he didn't have an overwhelming slap shot, because a lot of the better defensemen in the league all had one tool, and that was a stunning slap shot. He didn't. But anyways, those are some of my comments. And regarding memories or the best things, you can go on for an hour. So it basically is whatever comes to mind. And I think I've covered some of the important points, some specific, some in a broad brush.
What advice would you give to someone that wants to play the sport of ball hockey?
Do it. Do it. Never mind some of the hurdles where you think about whether you're not good enough or you're scheduling, because a lot of people say, well, I can't do it because I'm boating or I'm doing school or job or whatever. Just get started. Providence will take over. You'll find a way to slot yourself in. You may make some additions, deletions, change a few things, but we went through that in the beginning too. We asked certain players to play and they didn't think they could play because they were golfing or they were boating or whatever. Once they got involved, and they got involved in the camaraderie of a team, and like there were a lot of people they didn't know, they got to know, and some people they had a lot of things in common. So if they were into golfing, they had somebody who they could golf with, but on different times or different days or whatever. Just get involved and get started. And then and the old saying is Providence will take over. So you will find a way. And don't say, well, I'm not old enough, I'm not strong enough. I'll get down in a couple of years when I, mature or get stronger. Just get started, because there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of good times, a lot of fulfillment ahead of you, and joy and excitement and happiness ahead of you that you cannot mentally think or image in your mind ahead of time. A lot of things happen that were spontaneous. A lot of things happen that you never thought of. And you meet an incredibly amount of people. And if you could do it at a young age and get started and meet all these people, you expand your base for contacts, friends, and opportunities. I wish we had it. I wish we had it when I was that age, that at a teenager level, 9, 10, and of course, that's not teenager, but, from 13, 14, 15, we had a league like that. But even at 9 or 10, just to get started, it might not be so easy, because you may only have teams of, let's say, 10 players, and you're playing in a small rink or a limited rink or something, but you got to get started somewhere, and eventually you evolve. That's probably the best way I can put it.
Is there a person, if they were here right now, that you would want to personally thank for getting you involved in the sport of ball hockey?
There would be only one, and that was Louis Remedios. He lives you haven't been in contact with each other since 1984. He lives somewhere on the other side in North Vancouver. But I actually would have to go a step further, and I would have to say, I would thank Mark Dufresne for pushing us and being very persistent. And I mean, like, pushing us to start getting the ball rolling and getting into ball hockey. We had no idea what was in front of us at the time and how it would change and blossom and mature to where it went. You only imagine certain things, but it gets higher than that. It would have to be Mark Dufresne. I changed my mind. Like Lewis had a huge part in it, but it would have to be Mark Dufresne, because he would pepper us with ideas. And why don't you do something about it? Why don't you make some phone calls? Why don't you contact some people, see what they say, go to their meeting. See, it's easy for someone to say, go there, do this, do that. But we had the means to do it, or else the ability to ask the right questions or have an understanding of what is being said and how to do things, or to go about to do things. And a lot of it, we thought we knew, had the knowledge, but we didn't. We had to learn by experience. Or somebody like Ken Stevenson said, this is what they did in the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association, and this is something that you could learn from or do differently, or build on. And Steve Pozovic, that would be my other choice to say thank you to Steve Pozovic for everything that he did, because he absorbed a ton of work and time that made us be able to think creatively. We weren't being bogged down with details and stats and standings. It gave Louis Remedios and myself, and then Andre May, and then Rick Aslan the opportunity to think creatively. The third person I would have to say, without a doubt, and maybe when I say Rick Aslan, I would say that he was the catalyst in us rising to a higher level faster. So in the first 2 years, our improvement might have been a little bit. When Rick Aslan came, it was substantial. And I don't know if a lot of people took him for granted or just assumed that it was normal. But Rick Aslan, through his experience with Elmwood in the Community League, and also with other associations, which I don't remember, helped us tremendously. But also, he gave us a lot of confidence to carry out and do things. Some of us were a little bit uncomfortable with dealing people from the city or with bosses from the city. With Rick Aslan, it was no problem, because he's an adult dealing with adult. In the beginning, we were looked at as kids, like, kids, teenagers, whatever. Like, you don't have that kind of credibility, because we don't know if we can actually trust you regarding certain things, or coming up with money, or scheduling, or something like that. You add an adult. Rick Aslan brought up not only experience, but an adult presence when having to deal with City of Edmonton, arenas, leagues like the Alberta Ball Hockey Association, or else the Canadian Ball Hockey Association. He brought a presence. And I got to tell you another story. Something we talked about a little bit earlier. There was speculation in 1989-90 that certain teams in the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association who could not get a right to go to the provincial championships. As I said earlier, the Playboys, they wanted to play the winner of the CCBHA, and then the winner goes to the provincials. And as I said, Rick Aslan was very assertive in saying, if we're paying the fees, we're going. That's simple. Here is what very few people know. Somewhere around 1989-90, there was a group of teams in the second division and the first division of the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association who were talking. The word was they were going to form a small league in Beaumont. There's an arena in Beaumont. Beaumont, you can very easily get on. There's a road from the south side of Edmonton. You can get straight into Beaumont. The winner of that league was going to play the winner of the CCBHA. They were going to pay Alberta Ball Hockey Association fees too, and they were going to have the right to play the winner of the CCBHA, and that winner went to the Alberta Championships. Thus, teams like the Snipers, who were usually third in that premier division, and others, even some of the top teams in the second division, they say that is our passport to the Alberta Provincial Ball Hockey Championships. And again, there was a way that Rick Aslan created a barricade that it is either Edmonton Ball Hockey Association or Capital City Ball Hockey Association, no other leagues. Because Beaumont is essentially like next to Edmonton, so they got to be part of one or two leagues. That was a major accomplishment. And whether or not a group of teams would have left the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association, would actually form a league in Beaumont and go through all the organizational rigmarole to do that is questionable. It may have been speculation, but at least Rick Aslan created a situation where as long as the CCBHA was paying their fees, they would get an automatic right. They may add room for Beaumont, the winner of Beaumont, but not at the expense of the CCBHA. So those people I mentioned were critical because of their skill, but also the amount of time that they put in. And also, I would say John Simonetto, that was after me. But John Simonetto probably put maybe some would say too much time. Maybe he enjoyed it and he loved every minute of it. But I heard stories about the amount of time that John Simonetto was putting into the executive ball association, going to games and whatnot. It was 30, at least 30 hours a week, maybe 40. That was a lot of time, plus his job. And in the end, they all made things better. They created a launching pad for the CCBHA to go forward. And then once things got better and better, then all the best parts started to accelerate because of them, in my opinion.
Okay, so one more question. The sport of ball hockey has grown to an immense level. There's now an international street ball hockey federation that has world championships been going on since 1996. They're at every level: men's A, men's B, women's A, women's B. There's a men's master, under 17, there's different age groups going down into youth, etc. So with all that being said, and with so many countries now being involved, although some of them are more of the, we'll call it the elite countries that have the elite teams, like such as Canada and the Czech Republic and Slovakia and the United States. One of my question is to you, what do you see or hope for the future of ball hockey?
Now that you mention it, I didn't know that they're on an international level, to expand on an international level and eventually get a higher level of recognition. Maybe in about 16 or 20 years, you can have it in the Olympics.
When you say Olympics,
Summer Olympics.
Yeah, Summer Olympics, obviously. See, the discussion about Summer Olympics has come up. It has certainly come up. And I'm going to tell you what a few individuals mentioned in other interviews that I had. Some certainly said there's an avenue there directly to the Olympics. There's a lot of hurdles, of course. Some said, well, it's a sport that is too slow compared to ice hockey, and when you watch it, it's slow. But then again, watching curling is about as slow as you can get, almost, and it's still one of the highest ranked winter sports. And
what about water polo?
Water polo. There's some other sports, but here's one comment that was made that I think made the greatest sense, and that is the parity, and that is that we're still only have 2 or 3 countries that are dominating the sport, and to be a real Olympic sport, they want to see other countries and continents that can put out a product of the sport, or a representation of the sport that could compete. That's why baseball has never made it to the Olympics. It is a great sport. It's known here, but there's only 2 countries that are really good at it. Do you think there's a chance there could be some parity in the sport in other continents? Just from a standpoint as an observer, saying, yeah, I think it could, because it's that kind of sport. Or is it just, if you don't have hockey in your country, then you're not going to go anywhere?
The only chance you would have is, for example, you look at the teams that play in the World Cup, formerly the Canada Cup, 10, 12 teams, or else when they play the World Championships in Europe, at the end, during in the spring, they have the World Championships. A lot of the NHL players that don't make the teams that don't make the playoffs or get knocked out, they send players. Those countries that participate in the World Championships in the spring, they would be the most obvious candidates. Maybe it's a case of marketing and exposure that would bring them to that level to participate in ball hockey in the off season, and to put a team together of ball hockey players to participate in a World Championship. I think that Europe is the only answer. Other countries around the world, and it may come out of left field regarding who they are, Australia or China or Japan, they would have to take interest in it to assemble something for that right. But it would be, the only thing I could think of would be Eastern and Western Europe. to actually participate in something like that, because they only have to cross that bridge, and it's a small bridge to cross because they're already in sports like that, like ice hockey, but it's ball hockey, but like lacrosse or field hockey. Field hockey. You got field hockey, ball hockey. So even countries like Holland, who are, and I can't say about India, but Holland, who, if you're not in one of the big sports, it's not soccer, you're playing field hockey, especially women. Some of the Dutch women who play field hockey have actually gotten scholarships in the United States, but I'm getting off topic. It would be the European countries, both from the East and on the West, that they are a short step away if they only have the interest or the desire to start participating in that.
Now, on the flip side of, consideration of the Olympics, let's talk about the elite countries such as Canada and Slovakia. There has been discussion about some of the sport going into the professional level. That means sponsorship and full professional paid players into an actual league. Do you see that as being a great step, or would that be detrimental to the amateur status that it is at right now?
I think it would be detrimental. I think it would be detrimental.
In what aspect?
It's no longer fun anymore. It takes away from that. I noticed, for example, you see, of course, now over the last few years, the agenda has changed in regards to college football, maybe even basketball. But if we went back a long ways, you would see the enthusiasm and the excitement of college players to unify as a team to win a game or a bowl game for the national championship or national recognition. Those who are not playing in a major bowl game, certainly certain players were battling for recognition, for opportunity to be scouted or drafted. But I think that once it becomes professional, I'm going to tell you a story too. Once it becomes professional, a lot of the excitement and its, I would say, the lack of a better word, hopefulness is taken away, because amateur-wise, it is very, very genuine. It's an interest, it's a hobby. But when you get to paying players, you get into the case of who gets paid more. I'm doing better than you. I'm getting more stats. I want more playing time. I think it would really hurt the sport of ball hockey. In 1983, there were several teams that were chasing a player from the Edmonton Sun. They were offering such things as dinners at steakhouses, or else auto work, like work on his vehicle, whatever, oil changes and maintenance and everything else. And just for that one person. And you thought to myself, well, there were players on the Emperors who, because of their economic means, that they didn't have the economic means for membership, for the team dues and the jersey and everything. And they got a little bit of a free ride by a subsidy. Other people paid for them so that they could play because they were important. But I think that takes away, because there are some people on that team that knew that there were certain players. Well, you haven't got money to play ball hockey, but you got money for a waterbed. So you're just more or less writing an excuse. And because the importance to win a championship was so great, there were some people who chipped in, or there was another person who came up with the full shot just so they could play to win, because that person was an assistant coach and wanted that ring. But all in all, when you start going to salaries, you've taken away a lot from the game and the sport.
Thank you very much for your time, Henry. I appreciate it. You've given us a lot of information and armed us with a lot of a sense of what it was like in the beginning, all those hurdles that you mentioned you went through. And the sport is, without a question, the sport of ball hockey owes a lot to the original builders of the sport in the early days. Even if it was only for a few years, those that were there early on, that worked hard in the first stages, are what set the ground, the foundation for what became and what still is a great and well organized sport.
There were a lot of people like Steve Pozovic. They were already thinking 5 and 10 years ahead although in the beginning, many of us, Mark Dufresne, myself, Louis Remedios, others, from a year-to-year basis or month-to-month basis, you're trying to improve a little bit, but you're thinking about down the road. We always imagined having women play, because some of the girlfriends had already of players were actually playing some sport like that, and they wanted to get together, and they did. But Steve Posvic he said eventually, like, because his younger brother wanted to play and this and that, of having teenager kids and then young kids playing. It took, well, do you remember when the kids started playing? Mid-90s? 95, 96?
Late 80s. Late 80s. But Rick Aslan began it in 1987 was the official year, 86 or 87 was that. And then the minor program itself it was called minor after that. So it was called juniors before. Then the minor portion came along in the 90s, and they called it the minor association. But Rick Aslan started the small branch of, I think, 7 teams.
Yes.
Dairy Queen Flyers, that sort of thing. And then it became every age group. It was just any kid that was under 18 could play. And then it became 16 and 17, and then 15 and 14. And just like you do have in hockey, you have all your various age groups.
But the important lesson here is they just got started. You may have even had a 4-team league for young kids. You said 6, but even if it was 4, you're getting started and the word starts spreading. And depending on the promotion. Oh, I got to tell you an important story here. Oh boy, I almost forgot this. After Mark Dufresne had pushed Louis and Louis had Remedios, it was denied by the Edmonton Ball Hockey League. We had to find teams. We had some to start with. What happened was that Louis Remedios went to the City of Edmonton Parks and Recreation. He got all the lists of all the activities that were happening in gymnasiums in the city. And whenever there was something about ball hockey or floor hockey, through the week, he would go and see them. He also went on the John Short CFRN Sport Line to advertise. Brian Hall Sport Line on Sundays on CJCA. Also, the free papers that you get for your area. So in the West End, it was the West End Examiner. You had a South Side paper, a North Side paper, and we would advertise because it was free for community activity. That drew some. But we went to the gymnasiums and he talked about it with certain people, the organizers of various people, whatever teams, to get into the league. We were starting a new league, and they showed some interest, but a lot of them weren't sure about doing it. So we were talking about it, and I remember we were talking, got to the point where maybe we're not presenting to them properly. They just think you're playing somebody else somewhere and you got to pay for the arena. Why don't they just come play in our gymnasium or something like that? So we came up with the idea that this is an opportunity. You're playing amongst your friends for so many years. That's all you have for competition. Maybe as a young kid, you dreamed of playing people in a street hockey game in the next community or somewhere like, several blocks over. This is your opportunity. You do have to play in an arena because it's a standard surface, standard confines. We need referees and timekeepers. But imagine if you could get your friends together and other people, all the same uniforms, and you play for a championship trophy. As time goes on, you can change, improve, whatever. But we're just starting out. And we want to invite you for this opportunity to play in an organized league schedule against other teams from across the city of Edmonton. And eventually, we didn't know when, but eventually play in the Alberta Ball Hockey Championships. And that was it only took it was in the third season. And once we started doing that, then all of a sudden we started to draw interest. And there was Days Backhoe. That was the rogue team, the first one to leave the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association and come to our league. They were there for at least 2 years, but they came over. A lot of the teams were worried about having enough players. We had a lot of teams with about 9, 10, 11 players. And you say, well, you can have as much as I can't remember how many, 16 or 18 players. I said, call friends, people from high school, like anything. And a lot of teams for recruiting. Louis also put in articles in the paper or in the press through radio shows to call to certain numbers if there are players who want to play, but they haven't got a team. So we assigned them to whatever area there was a team. Now, another thing I got to tell you about is, and I'm going to tell you something that nobody knows. I don't think anybody, maybe Steve Posvic knows about in the first year, how we actually got the divisions. We eventually got a lot of teams, and we started the league probably about a month late because we didn't know how many teams we were going to have. We had 8, then 10, then an odd number like 11 and 9 and whatever. We were able to make a bit of a blitz or else ask people we had numbers for to make a commitment to being part of their league. All they had to do was come up with $500. That's all, $500. That would cover the expenses. You had to get your own uniforms, of course. And side note, when the league started to come together, nobody was able to get jerseys because hockey season was over. It's over for jerseys, February, March, it's over. We had a plethora of teams who had softball shirts with a number on it and a logo. A lot of teams with softball uniforms. But once that happened, $500 was nothing. Even in a recession, people came up with the money. We had to figure out teams, and oh, by the way, since like February, we had a lot of teams playing exhibition games against each other, getting a feeling of how good they are in gymnasiums and outdoor hockey rinks. And some teams traveled from across town, like Tri-Service, which was Chris Kuchar from the South Side. They came all the way out to the West End to play. We went all from the West End, went all the way out to the South Side to like a small corner of Mill Woods to play the South Side Raiders in a gymnasium. It was incredible. Anyways, we first figured, well, we'll create the divisions, 2 of them, based on 97th Street. Still too much of a cluster. Then 97th Street and 118th Avenue still didn't work. And here is the gem of the story. It came from Stampede Wrestling. There was a wrestler by the name of Kerry Brown who made reference to the Mason-Dixie line in the States. And light went on. North Saskatchewan River. We followed the North Saskatchewan River along with 97th Street, and we came up with the 2 divisions. There was 1 or 2 teams that were added because we had too many. The other thing was we also, it was based on where the initial contact for the team was. Some teams played it smart. So, well, if we're going to be with the Southside Raiders and this team, whatever, we want to go on the other side. So they said, well, contact the second person. Each team had a primary and a secondary person to call. The primary person would say, well, my buddy, the second guy, he lives out on the north side. Give him a call. We'll be in that division. And that's how the divisions were formed in the first year. I think that the bulk of the worry and labor took place from the middle of March till the beginning of May, because we started around mid-May, and there was also issues with school and whatnot. But we started a month late, and the schedule had to be compressed. But once you started, then the only challenge you had was scheduling. And at first it was an awkward feeling playing ball hockey in an arena. You've never done that before or at this level. And once people started playing, they started enjoying it, and they said, well, when's the next game? When's the next game? When do we play this team? When do we play that team? And we would say, it's coming up. We got to lay out the schedule. It's coming up. And it was a very, very unique experience. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life.
Thank you very much, Henry.
I also want to point out, I thank you for this time and the interview. I consider it to be a privilege.
Thank you very much. I also, I'm honored just to be able to talk to you about something that was so long ago. It was wonderful. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.